Welcome to Fear Files. Tonight, prepare to journey into the eerie world of the canvas of terror. Watch as a struggling artist inherits an ancient, cursed canvas that transforms his deepest fears and desires into living nightmares. Each brushstroke pulls him deeper into a sinister realm where reality and art blur, leading him to confront horrors beyond imagination. Stay tuned for a spine-chilling tale where creativity becomes a conduit for terror. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. Fear Files awaits. Are you brave enough to face what lies beyond the canvas?
The coastal town of Ashbourne was a hidden gem for artists seeking solitude and inspiration. Its cobblestone streets and Victorian mansions whispered tales of bygone eras, their grandeur faded yet enduring. Marcus Weaver, a once promising artist whose career had stalled in a mire of creative block, found himself drawn to this quaint town by an unexpected inheritance. Marcus had always been introspective, a quiet soul with an intense drive to create. His paintings, while hauntingly beautiful, had failed to capture the acclaim he so desperately sought. When his estranged great-grandfather's mansion was bequeathed to him, Marcus saw it as a chance to revitalize his career, unaware of the darkness that awaited him. The mansion was a sprawling relic from a bygone age, its once grand facade now weathered and overgrown with ivy. Inside, it was a labyrinth of dust-covered antiques, creaky floorboards, and forgotten rooms. Marcus marveled at the old masterworks that lined the walls, remnants of his great-grandfather's enigmatic career. One evening, while exploring the mansion's attic, Marcus stumbled upon a wooden chest hidden behind a stack of old canvases. The chest was intricately carved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Inside, Marcus found a set of ancient paintbrushes, their handles adorned with cryptic runes, and their bristles surprisingly pristine. The brushes felt strangely heavy in his hand, as if they carried the weight of centuries. Marcus's curiosity piqued, and he decided to test them. That night, he set up his easel in a dusty corner of the attic and began to paint. The brushes seemed to guide his hand with a precision he hadn't felt in years. Each stroke brought his canvas to life with a vibrancy and detail that left him in awe. As Marcus worked, the images he painted became increasingly dark. Nightmares long buried in his mind began to seep onto the canvas. Shadowy figures with hollow eyes, twisted landscapes bathed in crimson light. Despite the unsettling nature of the scenes, Marcus was captivated. The brushes had awakened something within him, a fervor that bordered on obsession. Marcus's success with the brushes came at a price. His once regular dreams became a series of vivid, horrifying nightmares. He would awaken in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing from the terror of the images that haunted him. The paintings he created seemed to reflect these nocturnal horrors, their figures growing increasingly sinister. One night, as Marcus worked late into the hours, he noticed something strange. The figures in his latest painting, a grotesque scene of a desolate forest with eerie reaching hands, seemed to move. At first it was subtle, a finger twitching, an eye blinking. Then the movement became more pronounced. The figures began to shift and sway, as if they were alive. Marcus tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, or his overactive imagination. But the whispers began soon after. They were faint at first, like the distant murmur of a storm. Gradually they grew louder, coalescing into coherent words. "Come closer. We need you." As Marcus's obsession with the brushes deepened, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He isolated himself from friends and family, focusing solely on his art. Clara, a fellow artist and one of Marcus's few remaining friends, grew concerned. She visited him one evening, hoping to offer support. Marcus, you've been cooped up here for weeks, Clara said, her eyes scanning the unsettling paintings that filled the room. You need to take a break. This isn't healthy. Marcus's eyes were wild, his face gaunt from sleepless nights. I can't stop now, Clara. These brushes, they're incredible. They're giving me a vision, a purpose. Clara's concern deepened as she noticed the strange movement in the paintings. Marcus, what are they doing? Before Marcus could answer, the whispering grew louder, filling the room with an oppressive weight. Clara shivered, feeling a cold draft that seemed to emanate from the paintings themselves. Determined to understand the brush's origins, Marcus sought out Dr. Emerson, an eccentric art historian with a penchant for the occult. Dr. Emerson, intrigued by Marcus's story, agreed to examine the brushes. These symbols, they're not just artistic flourishes, Dr. Emerson said, examining the brushes under a magnifying glass. They are runes of ancient sorcery. These brushes, they were used to bring art to life, but at a terrible cost. Marcus listened in horror as Dr. Emerson explained that the brushes had once belonged to a sorcerer who used dark magic to animate his creations. The sorcerer's art became a conduit for malevolent spirits, eventually leading to his own downfall. The brushes were cursed, their power forever entwined with the supernatural. Desperate to rid himself of the brushes, Marcus attempted to destroy them. But the entity, now fully aware of Marcus's intentions, fought back. The paintings became portals, and the figures began to spill out into the real world, their malevolent presence growing stronger. Marcus's mansion became a nightmarish battleground. Shadows flitted across the walls, and whispers filled the air, urging him to surrender. The entity's influence drove Marcus to the brink of madness. He began to see the figures from his paintings everywhere, their hollow eyes following him, their outstretched hands reaching for him. Clara and Dr. Emerson, realizing the gravity of the situation, came to Marcus's aid. Together, they devised a plan to banish the entity. They gathered the remaining paintings and brushes and performed a ritual to sever the connection between the real world and the malevolent force. The ritual was fraught with danger. As Marcus, Clara, and Dr. Emerson chanted the incantations, the mansion was plunged into chaos. The paintings writhed and twisted, and the figures emerged, clawing and screaming as they tried to escape. Marcus fought to stay focused, channeling all his willpower into the ritual. The entity, enraged, manifested as a swirling mass of shadow and darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent fire. The struggle was intense, and Marcus felt himself being drawn into the vortex of terror. In a final desperate act, Marcus hurled the brushes into the heart of the ritual fire, their dark energy crackling and roaring as they were consumed. The mansion trembled, and the entity let out a deafening wail before dissipating into nothingness. The ordeal left Marcus physically and emotionally drained. The mansion, though now free of the entity's influence, bore the scars of the battle. Clara and Dr. Emerson stayed with Marcus as he recovered, offering support and helping him rebuild his life. Marcus's paintings were destroyed, and he chose to leave the mansion behind. Though he had rid himself of the cursed brushes, the experience had left an indelible mark on him. He moved away from Ashbourne, seeking a fresh start in a new location, far from the shadows of his past. As he settled into a new life, Marcus found solace in creating art free from the influence of dark forces. The horrors he had faced would never truly fade, but he had emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of the price of ambition and the dangers of tampering with the unknown. The mansion in Ashbourne was left to decay, a silent testament to the darkness that once resided within its walls. The coastal town moved on, its artistic allure undiminished, but Marcus Weaver's tale served as a chilling reminder of the perils that lurk behind the allure of forbidden power. The English countryside was wrapped in a shroud of mist, that clung to the rolling hills and ancient trees, a silent witness to the passage of time. In the heart of this tranquil landscape stood Ravenswood Hall, a decaying manor of Gothic grandeur. It had been years since anyone had dared to live there, the estate now a relic of forgotten splendor, its once pristine gardens overrun with weeds. Julian Blackwood, a portrait artist known for his ability to capture the essence of his subjects, had just received an unexpected inheritance. The manor had come to him through a distant, estranged relative, Lord Edgar Ravenswood. Julian, whose career had been marred by a recent series of failures, saw the inheritance as an opportunity for renewal. The estate, with its brooding presence and rich history, promised inspiration for his next masterpiece. The day Julian arrived, the manor greeted him with an eerie silence. The heavy oak doors creaked as he pushed them open, revealing a grand entrance hall lined with faded tapestries and dust-covered furniture. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and mildew, and the sunlight streaming through the grimy windows seemed to cast long, spectral shadows. Julian felt a shiver run down his spine, but brushed it off. He was here to work, not to be deterred by a few cobwebs and creaks. He unpacked his painting supplies and set up his easel in what appeared to be the manor's former drawing room, its high ceilings and large windows offering an ideal space for his craft. The portrait Julian intended to paint was that of Lord Edgar Ravenswood himself. He found an old, dusty painting of the Lord in a neglected corner of the manor's library. The portrait depicted a man of imposing stature with a stern expression and piercing eyes that seemed to follow Julian wherever he moved. Julian, eager to begin, set up his easel in front of the portrait. He felt a strange energy in the room, a sense of being watched. He dismissed it as nerves and focused on his work. As he painted, he became absorbed in the task, his brush moving with a fluidity he hadn't felt in years. The colors seemed to blend effortlessly, and the details of Lord Edgar's face began to come alive on the canvas. Strange things started happening as Julian worked. The temperature in the room dropped and the light seemed to flicker. Julian noticed that the portrait's expression appeared to shift subtly. At times, the eyes of Lord Edgar seemed to follow him with an unsettling intensity. Julian was unsettled but dismissed it as a trick of the light or his imagination. Days turned into weeks as Julian continued to work on the portrait. The manor's oppressive atmosphere seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Julian's dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, and he began to feel a creeping sense of paranoia. One night, as he was finishing a late session in the studio, he heard a soft whispering coming from behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. Julian felt a cold draft brush past him, sending shivers down his spine. Determined to finish the portrait, Julian pressed on. But the portrait's changes became more pronounced. Lord Edgar's expression grew more menacing, his eyes darker and more intense. The Lord's gaze seemed to pierce through Julian, filling him with a sense of dread. Julian's growing unease reached its peak when he noticed something truly alarming. The portrait had begun to exhibit strange phenomena. The brushstrokes seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, and the image of Lord Edgar appeared to move, as if the figure within the painting were trying to reach out. One evening, as Julian worked late into the night, the air in the room grew cold. The shadows cast by the flickering candlelight seemed to writhe and stretch. Julian felt an irresistible pull toward the portrait, and as he approached it, he saw the painting's surface ripple like water. In a moment of terror and fascination, Julian reached out to touch the portrait. His fingers met the canvas, and an electric jolt surged through him. The room around him seemed to dissolve, and Julian found himself standing in a different realm, a shadowy, twisted version of Ravenswood Hall. The parallel world was a nightmarish reflection of the manor, with distorted architecture and a sky perpetually shrouded in darkness. The air was thick with an oppressive fog, and the ground beneath Julian's feet was cold and barren. The walls of the manor in this world seemed to whisper with unseen voices, and the figures within the shadows seemed to watch his every move. As Julian wandered through the parallel world, he encountered strange and unsettling creatures, ghostly figures with hollow eyes and twisted faces. They seemed to be trapped in a cycle of torment, their anguished cries echoing through the corridors of the twisted manor. In his search for a way back, Julian came across a hidden chamber filled with ancient books and occult artifacts. Among them was a journal that belonged to Lord Edgar Ravenswood. The journal detailed the Lord's experiments with dark rituals and his quest for immortality. Julian read with growing horror as he learned that Lord Edgar had used the portrait as a gateway to a parallel world, seeking to trap souls within it for eternity. Julian realized that the portrait he had been painting was not just a likeness, but a key to the cursed realm. The more he worked on the portrait, the stronger the connection between the worlds became. Lord Edgar's spirit had been manipulating Julian's work to draw him into the parallel world permanently. Determined to escape the nightmare, Julian returned to the manor's main hall and searched for a way to break the curse. He found an old tome with instructions for a ritual that could sever the connection between the worlds and free those trapped within. The ritual required a specific incantation and the destruction of the cursed portrait. Julian gathered the necessary components and prepared for the ritual. The parallel world seemed to react to his efforts, with the shadows growing darker and the creatures becoming more aggressive. As Julian began the incantation, the manor around him twisted and roared with rage. In a climactic confrontation, Julian faced Lord Edgar's spirit. The Lord's ghostly form was a twisted amalgamation of rage and despair, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. Julian fought against the spirit's attempts to prevent the ritual, struggling to maintain his focus amidst the chaos. With a final, desperate effort, Julian completed the incantation. The portrait on the canvas shattered, and the connection between the worlds was severed. The parallel world began to collapse, its shadows retreating and its creatures disappearing into the void. Julian felt himself being pulled back into his own world. The manor around him shuddered, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. He awoke in the drawing room, surrounded by the remnants of the shattered portrait and the dim light of dawn filtering through the windows. The manor was no longer the oppressive, eerie place it had been. The atmosphere had shifted, and the sense of malevolence was gone. Julian was physically and emotionally drained, but he had survived the ordeal. The portrait was destroyed, and Ravenswood Hall was left to decay once more, its dark secrets sealed away. Julian decided to leave the manor behind and start anew. He moved to a quieter location, far from the shadows of his past. As he settled into his new life, Julian found solace in creating art that was free from the influence of dark forces. The memories of his time in Ravenswood Hall haunted him, but he had emerged from the experience with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the cost of ambition and the dangers of seeking immortality. Ravenswood Hall remained a silent monument to the horrors that had transpired within its walls. The manor stood as a grim reminder of the consequences of tampering with forces beyond understanding, a chilling testament to the price of pursuing one's darkest desires. Ethan Blake had always been drawn to the fringes of the art world, where the spotlight rarely shined and the shadows were thick with secrets. The old city, with its labyrinthine streets and weathered buildings, seemed to hum with a history of its own. It was in this setting that Ethan discovered the small, dusty shop nestled between two decrepit buildings, a place that seemed to be forgotten by time. The shop's dim interior was cluttered with relics of bygone eras, each item draped in dust and mystery. Ethan's eyes were immediately drawn to an ancient canvas, partially hidden behind a stack of yellowed newspapers. Its ornate frame was covered in intricate carvings that hinted at something both sinister and alluring. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a face etched in lines of both wisdom and malevolence, noticed Ethan's interest. "Ah, I see you found the old canvas," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It's said to hold mystical powers. Not many have ventured to use it." Intrigued by the shopkeeper's cryptic words and the canvas's eerie beauty, Ethan decided to purchase it. The transaction was brief and unsettlingly cheap, the shopkeeper's eyes gleaming with an inscrutable light. As Ethan left the shop, he felt a shiver of anticipation and dread. Back in his studio apartment, Ethan carefully cleaned the canvas. The frame's carvings seemed to shift and twist under the light, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes in the carvings were watching him. Unfazed, he prepared his paints and brushes, ready to bring new life to the old canvas. Ethan's initial excitement was palpable. The canvas, with its mysterious aura, seemed to inspire him like never before. He began by painting abstract scenes, dark forests, shadowy figures, and unsettling symbols that had always haunted his dreams. As the brushstrokes flowed, he noticed something strange. The colors seemed to shimmer with an unnatural intensity, and the details appeared to move ever so slightly. Late one night, Ethan woke to find his apartment in disarray. The latest painting, a depiction of a monstrous creature with burning eyes, had been partially destroyed. The canvas was smeared with an oily substance, and the monstrous figure seemed to writhe with a life of its own. Ethan dismissed it as a result of his own stress and sleepwalking, but a gnawing sense of unease took hold. Determined to create something truly memorable, Ethan continued to paint. He poured his deepest fears and desires into each piece, pushing the boundaries of his imagination. The more he painted, the more he felt an inexplicable connection to the canvas, as if it were responding to his emotions and thoughts. As Ethan's obsession with the canvas deepened, strange occurrences began to plague him. Shadows in his apartment seemed to shift and dance, and unexplained noises echoed through the walls. The temperature in the room would drop suddenly, and the once familiar surroundings became suffused with an unsettling presence. One night, Ethan was startled awake by a loud crash. Rushing to the studio, he found his paintings scattered across the floor. The once vibrant colors had turned into dark, menacing shades, and the figures on the canvases seemed to twist into grotesque forms. He tried to reassure himself that it was merely his imagination running wild, but the terror gnawed at his sanity. Friends and acquaintances began to notice Ethan's deteriorating state. His eyes were hollow, and he seemed constantly on edge. Conversations with his friends revealed his obsession with the canvas and the strange events occurring in his apartment. Despite their concern, Ethan dismissed their worries, unable to pull himself away from the allure of his creation. The manifestations from Ethan's paintings grew more intense and disturbing. He began to see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his vision, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. These entities seemed to feed off his fear, growing more aggressive with each passing day. Ethan's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the entities were watching him, whispering dark secrets into his ears. The once inspirational canvas had become a conduit for nightmarish entities that seemed to possess a mind of their own. In a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, Ethan sought out an old art teacher, Professor Evelyn Gray, who had once dabbled in occult studies. When Ethan described the canvas and the strange occurrences, Evelyn's face turned ashen. She explained that the canvas was likely imbued with dark magic, a relic from an ancient time when artists sought to channel forbidden forces through their work. Evelyn's warnings about the dangers of such a canvas only fueled Ethan's determination to uncover its secrets. He continued to paint, driven by an obsessive need to understand the connection between his art and the terrifying entities that haunted him. As Ethan's paintings became more nightmarish, the entities grew more aggressive. They began to invade his dreams, their distorted faces and shrill screams filling his nights with terror. Ethan found himself trapped in a cycle of fear and creation, each new painting unleashing new horrors that tormented him both in his waking life and his dreams. The line between reality and the nightmare world created by his paintings became increasingly blurred. Ethan would find himself wandering through his apartment, haunted by the manifestations, only to wake up and discover that the nightmare had seeped into his reality. The once familiar space had become a prison, with the entities lurking in every shadow and corner. Ethan's isolation grew as he pushed away friends and loved ones who tried to help him. He became a recluse, obsessed with the canvas and the entities it had unleashed. His once thriving career as an artist was now a distant memory, overshadowed by his descent into madness. In a final, desperate bid to escape the nightmare, Ethan resolved to confront the entity directly. He set up an elaborate ritual in his studio, using symbols and artifacts from ancient occult practices that Evelyn had described. The ritual was intended to sever the connection between the canvas and the malevolent force it had summoned. As Ethan performed the ritual, the room was filled with a blinding light. The shadows writhed and twisted, and the entities from his paintings converged upon him, their forms shifting and contorting with rage. Ethan faced the entity in its full, terrifying glory, an amalgamation of his darkest fears and desires, a shadowy presence that seemed to consume all light and hope. The confrontation was a harrowing ordeal. Ethan struggled to maintain his focus as the entity attacked him with a barrage of nightmarish visions and physical manifestations. He fought to complete the ritual, his mind teetering on the brink of collapse. In a climactic moment of courage and clarity, Ethan completed the ritual and destroyed the cursed canvas. The entity's rage reached a fever pitch as the painting shattered and the connection between the worlds was severed. The manifestations were drawn back into the painting, and the nightmarish realm began to dissolve. Ethan felt himself being pulled back into his own world. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the shadows receded. The apartment, though still disheveled, was no longer filled with the malevolent presence that had plagued him. Ethan collapsed in exhaustion, his mind and body drained from the ordeal. The remnants of the cursed canvas lay scattered around him, a grim reminder of the horrors he had faced. He knew that he had survived, but the scars of his experience would remain with him forever. With the curse lifted, Ethan left the apartment and moved to a quieter, safer location. The experience had left him profoundly changed, both physically and emotionally. He struggled to rebuild his life and career, haunted by the memories of his ordeal. Though the manifestations and the canvas were gone, Ethan found it difficult to escape the lingering effects of his encounter with the entity. The psychological scars of his experience remained, and he found solace in the quiet simplicity of his new life. Ethan continued to paint, but his work was now imbued with a sense of melancholy and introspection. He channeled his experiences into his art, creating pieces that explored themes of fear, redemption, and the fragility of the human mind. Ravenswood Hall, the cursed canvas, and the entities that once tormented Ethan became part of a dark chapter in his past. Though he found some semblance of peace, the memory of the canvas and the nightmares it had unleashed would forever serve as a reminder of the fine line between creativity and madness. Years later, a new artist moved into Ethan's old apartment, drawn by the allure of the decrepit space and the stories surrounding it. Unbeknownst to them, the old canvas was still hidden in a forgotten corner of the building's attic, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. The cycle of fear and creation was poised to begin anew as the cursed canvas lay in wait, ready to unleash its dark power once more. The legacy of Ethan Blake's encounter with the entity would continue to haunt the corridors of the apartment, a chilling testament to the dangers of unlocking the darkness within the human soul.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed tonight's descent into the dark heart of the canvas of terror. If the shadows on the canvas haunted your dreams, make sure to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling new episode from Fear Files. Until next time, keep your lights on and your fears close, because the next story might just come to life. Stay fearful, Fear Files.